Welcome to WRM, Work Relationships Matter. I'm your host, the Edward Jones, a certified life coach and host of this podcast. My guest is Brad Qualls. He's coming back for a second time. We talked about his life growing up earlier and his wonderful romance with his wife the last time, but this time we're going to talk about his role as a peace officer and what it's like to be an African American and also be an officer and what that experience was like. He's here today to share his experiences that I know will be beneficial to you.
Mhm.
Welcome, Brad. Welcome again, let me say.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate being here. Appreciate you asking me to come back on.
Well, great. And
Mhm.
we weren't able to get into it as much the last time, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on with being a peace officer in the Black community. I remember when I was in college, I became an RA, and people thought that I had sold out because I was an RA and I was going to keep order in the residence halls, that I would lose my blackness. So I
Mhm.
know that with a peace officer, it's probably that times 10. So let's talk about that experience. And you talked a little about how you got started. Let's start there and then move forward to the experiences that you had.
Sure. Well, as a kid growing up, police officer was one of the things on my list that I thought I might like to do someday. Um, and as I got older, I gravitated more toward law enforcement than anything else. And when I finished school, when I graduated from college, um, I went to work in youth corrections at
Well,
the
let, let,
California.
let me stop you for a minute there.
Mhm.
When you started out, you said you looked at officers and you said, "This is what I think I want to be." What was it that got you interested?
Oh, it was just the fact that growing up in the Bay Area in Oakland, Berkeley, I knew a couple of the Berkeley, city of Berkeley police officers. They would come to the high school football games and basketball games and so forth. And we got to know them. And a
Hmm.
few actually, coached us when we were growing up. And just seeing the guys around, talking to them mentoring us and talking to us about law enforcement as a possible career, really helped to steer me in that direction.
Okay, so it's the relationships that were built with the officers that were coming into the community to work with you. There's a thing they used to call community-based policing. Is that what that was?
Well, back then when I was in high school, I'm not sure what they called it then. Community-based policing is a concept that came to fruition during my career. So I'm not really sure what they called it, but it
Mhm.
is, um, but that is an example of of the future of community-based policing as far as what they were doing at that time. I'm not sure what they called it back then. And just on that one point, it talks about community-based policing. I've been on record to say that when it comes to community-based policing, my personal feeling is communities communities need to be serviced and not policed. It's
Mhm.
criminals that need to be policed. Communities actually need to be serviced. So that community-based policing, although it's a great concept, the actual title, I never really quite agreed with that.
Okay. Now, the thing I think about is these guys must have done this on their own.
Yeah, like I said, a few of them were our coaches growing up, our youth coaches in basketball, football. Um, Kind of the same situation that I was in. I mean, as an officer, I coached youth sports. I coached
Mhm.
basketball, football, track, and even today, in retirement, I'm a high school football and basketball coach. And
Right.
the whole thing for me has basically gone full circle.
Absolutely. Now, did these men live in your neighborhood?
Um, Not so much in my neighborhood, but in the community. I mean, in like the city of Berkeley.
Hmm.
Um, I believe the majority of them did. Yeah, because you saw them out, all the time. If they weren't with us coaching, you might run into them at a restaurant, or you might see them at the movies, or just out and about.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, I think about those who are in the neighborhood that you see as without the badge on. You see
Mhm.
them more as just regular people around versus someone who comes in from out of the community that they really don't know the people.
Right, right.
And
That's absolutely right. I think the overall relationships that were built during those times or during a situation like that helps
Mhm.
because, you know, when you have contact with an officer for whatever reason and he knows you or knows of you, then it makes that contact go a lot smoother with regards to alleviating any kind of situations or problems, as opposed to someone that you have contact with that you've never seen, and they might have just drawn that assignment that day to work, where you happen to live. That might not be
Mhm.
their regular beat. For some reason they got shipped to that side of town for whatever reason, and that happens
Mhm.
sometimes. So it was always a good situation to be involved with with regard to enforcement contacts with people that you knew or you heard of. You might
Mhm.
not necessarily have known an officer, but once you saw his name tag, oh yeah, man, I heard of this guy. He's pretty cool, and it just made
Right.
everything a lot smoother.
Right. Now, how was crime in your neighborhood? Because one of the things that we look at now is they talk about crime in neighborhoods and working with that. Did those officers help keep crime down, or what was it like?
Well, in my neighborhood during that time, excuse me, crime the crime level was probably just about how it is in any other neighborhood,
Mhm.
but just more like little mischievous type of things. Nothing really major, nothing really felonious or anything like that. Um, you know, uh, they'd come and we're out late, just hanging out, and they'd come by and see us standing on the corner and say, "Hey, don't hang out here too long. You're not supposed to be out here. You kids have a curfew. You need to get in." That would be it. Just little mischievous stuff like that. As far as
Mhm.
dealing with adults, I think the crime rate during that time when I was growing up was probably just about the same as anywhere else. You know, I
Okay.
can't really speak on that. Um, not, I mean, growing up in it during that time and not really knowing the situation with adults. But I know when it came to us kids, it was just little mischievous stuff. There was a local
Okay.
YMCA in my neighborhood, and when they closed, we would hop the fence. We would climb over a fence, a high fence actually, to go in the back, not to cause problems, but just to play basketball. Police would pull
Right.
up. They'd pull up and say, "Hey, you guys know you're not supposed to be in there. Get out." And that would be, we climb the fence, leave, and that'd be it. Not a
Right.
big deal. Hmm.
But one thing I think about is that why that closed down, that seemed to be a way to keep you all off the street. And then when you couldn't get in there legitimately, you
Hmm.
were in substance saying, we need this.
Yes.
So do you think those kinds of things make a difference in communities and would actually make policing easier?
Yeah, they would. Um, uh, because kids need a place to congregate when they're not in school. If they're not playing some type of sport or something like that, they need a place where they can go, where they're comfortable, where they're safe, where they can enjoy each other's company. They can play basketball. They've got rooms that you can go, you can study, computer labs, all kind of things like that. So I know that there's budgetary problems with certain cities and so forth, and keeping those type of recreation centers open is kind of tough. But I know the department that I worked for, in we had a little office at one of the local centers in the South Sacramento area. So the
Hmm.
kids would come in to do their thing, and we had a office off in the back that was usually staffed by one officer for just a couple hours a day after
Hmm.
school. And that made a big difference. There was a law enforcement presence there, and the kids would come by, they'd say hi. We had little trinkets to give them, little plastic badges and all that kind of stuff, which they seemed like they enjoyed receiving. So yeah, I think those kind of places are crucial, especially for kids, and keeping them on the straight and narrow.
Absolutely. Now, the thing that was a big issue in after George Floyd was defund the police, and I never liked that term. I'm thinking that with what you're talking about, you definitely need to have police there, especially the way they operated with you. But I'm thinking that police budgets, in spite of that, some of them have gone up. And I look at it that service where officers are actually working with kids, they could take some of the money for enforcement and put it into relationship building. So you
Hmm.
have the amount of money, but rather everything being we gotta go in and break things up, that you might be able to be proactive and kids would never get into that in the first place. I was listening to a show called I Am Athlete with Brandon Marshall, and they were talking about those athletes who were pro football players who said how much those community places, whether it's the YMCA or any other boys and girls club, how that made such a big difference in their lives, and it kept them away from bad influences. So the idea of maybe shifting some of that money to other parts of policing, would that be something? Because the budgets are there, but it seems like there may be more for enforcement than in terms of relationship building. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, when it comes to this whole deal about defunding the police, I personally think that yes, there are some places where the police can probably cut, and that money can be used elsewhere to help build and establish those relationships in the community. I think that's important. But the problem is, it runs into other issues with regards um, to how the police are going to be able to function and respond. Um, there's personnel issues, there's equipment issues, um, there's special programs issues that the police have concerns about. So there's a fine line there. There's a slippery slope, but I do believe that most agencies have somewhere that they can cut and be able to recycle that money back into the community to help. Now, when you're talking about taking millions and millions of dollars from the police, I think that's a problem. But I do believe that there is money out there that can be used to help these communities and establish programs that will help kids, stay off the street and not get in trouble. That can maybe go into homeless shelters, so you don't have to call the police because of vagrancy or something like that. Money that can go back into the schools for after school athletic programs, or just anything. I mean, your imagination can take you all over the place with that. So I think it's a good thing, but I also think when you're talking about taking millions and millions, I think that can be a problem for the police, because there are critical issues or critical functions that they need that money for to be able to effectively serve the community.
Because the one thing I was thinking about, rather than taking the money from the police, using money like for the officers that helped you when you grew up, that they were still officers, but I think it's good to see people in uniform who are coming to help you. So
Yes.
rather than having somebody come from someplace else and think it's them or the police, it would be, these are the police and
Mm-hmm.
they are helping you. So it's not a matter of cutting the money from the police. That's why I said I have never been a fan of that term. I
Yes.
don't think you need to defund the police. I think you need to, I think, broaden the horizon of police. In fact, going back to the idea of those
Mm-hmm.
guys that you saw and they said, hey, Brad, you guys, it's too late. You guys need to go home. You're not going to
Yes.
go in and try to arrest them and get out your crackheads. It's like, go on home. Here it is. I know your
Mm-hmm.
mother.
Yes.
She doesn't want you out here. I'll call her
Mm-hmm.
up. That type of role. So it's not defunding the police. It's getting the police in the community,
Mm-hmm.
working with them the same way they worked with you. And I think
Exactly.
if you do that front end stuff, you'll have fewer problems on the back end. That's my
Mm-hmm.
thought. Now, am I off base or am I too Pollyannish on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think you're 100% correct. And it's just a matter of getting people to sit down and really talk about it. We see this all the time where they say, yeah, we're gonna have these meetings, we're gonna do this, we're gonna figure this out. And it's frustrating because it seems like, that never really gets done. You know,
Mm-hmm.
did they ever really get together and talk?
No.
And
Why do you think that? Why do you think that occurs that way?
you know, I think it has a lot to do with mistrust. I think it has a lot to do with egos. And when you have community leaders that want to sit down with the police and the police continues to put them off for whatever reason, then there's a problem there at the police department. As much as I hate to admit that, there's a problem there.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I hear of this type of particular situation, it's always the community leaders or activists that are saying, hey, we're supposed to talk, but we can't get in with them.
Mm.
So, so I'm not really sure, what's going on there with regards to the police, but um, um, it's all just a matter of being able to get together, sit at a table, and talk and try to work on some of these issues. and I think until we're able to actually do that, we're going to continue to have these problems that we see today. Because you can go all the way back to Ferguson, and the talk was, we're going to get together and talk. We're going to get together and talk. But really, have you heard of anybody having any type of meaningful dialogue? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't.
No, I haven't seen that, and that's the issue that I look at, because I think about, because Ferguson, actually, I was in Ferguson a week after Michael Brown was killed, because my cousin was married there,
Okay.
and my cousin lives in Florin, and that's the suburb next to um, the area where he was killed. So it's next to Ferguson. So and actually the Uber drivers took us to Ground Zero where Michael Brown was killed.
Okay.
So it was really, and what was happening there is they were doing a lot of bogus stops, finding people who didn't have enough money, making sure they couldn't use their vehicles, so they lost their jobs, but they were actually getting more money for the police department by these bogus stops. So there was a
Right.
consent
Right.
decree to stop that from happening. So I just and so I look at that and I'm thinking, what would make people want to do that to people? And they didn't want the consent decree, but it's that oversight was trying to help balance everything off. If you had the power, how would you create dialogue between the police and the community? Because it seems to be getting more and more divided, and dialogue is the thing that would solve it. So for example, would you want to be the chief of police in Sacramento?
That's a tough job, but to aspire to be the chief or a ranking command officer in a police department, I think most officers, young officers that have any ambition at all, whether they make it or not, but at some point do aspire to rise to those type levels. So yes, I was one of them. I promoted, one time in my department, and excuse me, I promoted one time in my department, and that's as high as I went. But I really enjoyed being a line supervisor. I was a sergeant, and there were times when I was the watch commander. I was the only one in authority that someone could talk to, especially at night. At night. So yeah, being the chief of Sacramento would have been something I would have aspired to want to do.
Right. Now, when you think about the issues that are going on in Sacramento today, given all that, first of all, how do you describe or are you familiar, since you live in Folsom, right?
No, I live here in Sacramento.
Okay, so how do you describe the environment in Sacramento, and given the pros, the pluses and the minuses, what would you do if this world were yours, how would you approach fixing it?
Okay. Well, before I get into that, just let me go on record and say that I think Chief Hahn has done an outstanding job.
Okay.
I know him and I don't know him. And what I mean by that is, when we were officers, when he was just a regular street officer, and myself, I used to see him in certain places where we would go and have coffee or a meal. I would see him around. So I know who he is and everything, and he's been very successful in his climb with that department. And he was the chief of Roseville for a while as well.
Right.
And excuse me, got a little sore throat here. But I think he's done really well. From my perspective, I think as myself as a chief, the first thing I would do is talk to my mid-level management guys and my sergeants, and I would let them know that my vision is not to just get out here and hammer these people. You know, we're not going to get out here. We're not going to oversight them. You know, we're not going to make stops that are unnecessary. Okay, we're not going to. We you know, they talk about cops. Well, they have this gut feeling, so they stopped this guy. No, we're not going to have those type of stops. All our stops are going to be based on righteous cause, probable cause. Okay, we're not going to do nothing to inflate any type of charges. We're going to do everything by the book, and there's going to be a review process in place to review these stops, to review these arrests, to make sure that they were handled professionally, to make sure that we weren't overzealous by just stacking stacking charges on top of each other on somebody just because that person had an attitude with us. You know, just because that person may have resisted arrest a little bit. Okay, we're going to file the appropriate charges, but we're not going to go overboard on it. And we're going to red flag those reports and those circumstances that have the appearance that these types of things have been done. And we're going to look at the officers. We're going to go back and we're going to look at their arrest history and find out if they have a history of charges being stacked on someone. And if that's true, then we're going to pull this guy, he or she, in for some remedial training, make sure they understand what the policy is and what my vision for this department is. And then we're going to put them back out and we're going to monitor what they do. And we're going to build those relations by meeting with city officials, with activists such as Black Lives Matter and whoever else. We're going to establish relationships with our gay and lesbian community that has issues of being targeted out there. Recently with our Asian community, of what they've been going through. And I believe these are some of the things that Chief Hahn has implemented. Now, I know he's taken some heat. I know there's been some things that people feel that he's not doing for whatever reason, but the things I just mentioned, I don't want it to sound in any way like this is something he's not doing, because I believe it is.
Well, the thing that I think about is I've heard that the city manager has more power than the mayor, and police unions have more power than the chief.
Well,
and that could be a way that hinders things. So is that accurate?
Well, the city manager does have more power than the mayor. I don't even know why we have a mayor if you're going to have a city manager. And as far as the police unions are concerned, police unions don't have more power than the chief.
Okay.
But the problem with unions is there are rules set up for different procedural steps to handle certain things. Like Chief Hahn just couldn't fire an officer just straight out. There's a film, he did this, it looks bad, yeah, he did it. And he just can't say, You're fired. Give me your badge. The police unions and what they have a thing called the Peace Officers Procedural Bill of Rights. There are steps that need to be taken before you can actually fire an officer. Now, you can remove him from his duties and put him on paid or unpaid leave, but you just can't fire him outright. And if the chief doesn't follow, if he wants to terminate someone, if he doesn't follow the steps set out in whatever their union bylaws are, and also what's in the California Peace Officers Procedural Bill of Rights, if he doesn't follow those steps, he fires that officer appeals, they do the research, and they find that he missed a step or he didn't do something right. That's going to be grounds for when this officer appeals to get his job back for that termination to be overturned. That's exactly what happened in Atlanta when the mayor, I think, got caught up in the vibe of what's happening socially, fired that officer that killed that guy that was in the parking lot at Jack in the Box or something like that.
Right.
He was in some fast food restaurant. They fired that guy, bam, like that. That guy got his job back because the mayor could not do that. There were steps in place to do that. They could remove him, but there are steps that you have to take to fire him. They got to do an administrative investigation, administrative hearing. All that takes longer than 24 hours.
Right.
And that's how that guy got his job back, because on appeal, they said the city didn't take the necessary steps that it needed to take to fire this guy based on their union bylaws and so forth.
Right. Now,
so that's what.
Yeah, but and so I get that. Now, let me ask this question: does race matter?
I would think that in some cases it probably does. You know, and that's just my opinion.
Right, because those are issues that come up, and those are the things that there's a book called Crucial Conversations, and it's one that I think is in line with what you're talking about with your approach, with the dialogue. Because I think at this point, America, and it's no different than in law enforcement, is becoming so much more polarized. Yes. And people don't want to listen. They only listen to people who think like they do. So that makes it hard to have empathy in a way, and empathy is not a soft thing, but it's just the idea of seeing the world through others' eyes, hearing it through their ears, and feeling it as they feel it. Now, you may not agree with how they feel, but you want to at least have the empathy where you can say, I see where they're coming from. And once you get that, then I think you're in a better position to actually have true dialogue rather than just head-to-head argument. I'm going to dig my heels in, and I'm just waiting for you to shut up so I can shut you down. Because I see that happening everywhere. And when I listen to the community things, I listen to Family Matters, and some of the things they talk about I agree with, some of them I don't. But the idea is that the dialogue is the key to making it work. So we're just about out of time, but if there's anything else you'd say I want to mention before I go, what would that be?
Well, I think that there has been progress made with regards to the community and the police. things are still at a point where there's much improvement needed on both sides, and that's where you're right, where you're talking about where the communication has to come in, because the police have to be better educated about the community that they serve. And then the people that live in that community, one of the problems we have is we have too many street level attorneys that think they know the law, trying to advise these people on what they have to do and what they don't have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that causes a lot of problems. So once people sit down and talk, and we have seminars and people can learn, yeah, you can refuse this, or no, you can't refuse that. It's a situation where you're either knowledgeable or you're not. Knowledge is power. And one thing I always tell, excuse me, one thing I always talk to youngsters about is what to do when they are stopped, where to keep their hands, where they should keep their wallet and identification. I tell my sons, don't put your wallet in your pocket. Put it right there on the council. So we. And if you think you've been profiled, you come talk to me, and we'll settle it. We'll go through the steps about a complaint and so forth. But right there, the officer has control. You're not going to win that situation at all. So you might as well cooperate, accept the ticket. If that's what he stopped you for, don't argue. I wasn't speeding. You stopped me because I'm black, all that. Don't argue. Take the ticket, go on about your business, and deal with it later. The problem comes in when we start arguing with the police and think it's going to get handled right there, because you don't have to do what this guy's telling you because somebody gave you some bad advice.
Absolutely. So one thing that would be helpful, Brad, is at the Alpha Academy, we bring in an officer to talk about these very things. And your perspective, I think, would be very helpful to them. So I might contact, well, I'm going to contact Hicks, Christopher Hicks. You know Chris, right?
Yes.
And he coordinates the Alpha Academy now. So I think that's the issue that people need to have. Someone who's been there. I like your background and how you started in law enforcement by watching officers work with you all, and then they say the full circle thing, and you have two sons. So you're probably one of the most qualified people to talk about this thing, to let people know, don't be getting in somebody's face who's got a gun and a billy club. There are ways to come back and get it, and you don't have to stand your ground at that moment, because you may be underground if you continue in that route. So
exactly.
I know you're busy, but I just thought that you would be someone who'd be great to be able to help our young men understand better how to deal with the situation.
All you got to do is let me know when to be there.
Great, we'll do that. So we're out of time, but Brad, thank you so much for coming back and sharing your role as a peace officer and as an African American in the community and how things could be better. So I really appreciate your information. It's been great.
Well, thank you, sir, for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you and seeing you in church, and I'll be waiting to hear from you about the Alpha Academy.
Great. Well, folks, this is the end of this episode. I am the Edward Jones, a certified life coach and podcast host of Work Relationships Matter. To learn more about my coaching, go to www.prodestinycoaching.com. If you're interested, take the work relationship quiz and you could win a 50-minute complimentary consultation. And remember, work relationships work for those who work on them. Have a great day.